For this week only, it's a special business forum. It's on this Wednesday, the Business Forum, with your host, communication specialist Sandrine Rattan. At 3 o'clock, find out what's going on in our various sectors and industries which impact positively on the socio-economic landscape locally, regionally, and internationally. The Business Forum with Sandrine Rattan, exclusively on Power 102.1 FM. This special edition of Business Forum this Wednesday afternoon at 3 o'clock. This Wednesday's guest
is Mr. Marcelo Giugale, Senior Director of Poverty Reduction and Economic Management at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. Business Forum brought to you courtesy the Unit Trust Corporation of Trinidad and Tobago Limited.
All right, and of course, we invite you inside another very special edition of the Business Forum. It's Power 102.1 FM. And it's always my pleasure to be joined by communication specialist Sandrine Rattan. Sandrine, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Sir Charles, and good afternoon to Trinidad and Tobago and to our listeners on the World Wide Web. Special good afternoon and welcome to our international counterparts at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., who are tuned into the program at this time. Special thanks and appreciation to our sponsors, the Unit Trust Corporation of Trinidad and Tobago. This afternoon, we'll be discussing the major role and functions of the World Bank, as well as some of the fundamental initiatives being facilitated by the organization, particularly at this time when the world faces some economic challenges. And my guest is Mr. Marcelo Giugale, who is the Sector Director responsible for poverty reduction and economic management at the World Bank. But before joining Mr. Giugale on the line, allow me to share a brief bio on him. Mr. Marcelo Giugale has 20 years' experience as an international development leader, spanning in the Middle East, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and Latin America. He has published widely on economic policy, finance, development economics, business, agriculture, and applied econometrics. He was the chief editor of collections of policy notes published for the presidential transitions in Mexico in 2000, Colombia 2002, Ecuador 2003, Bolivia 2006, and Peru in 2006 as well. He was decorated by the governments of Bolivia and Peru. Mr. Giugale has taught at the American University in Cairo, the London School of Economics, and the Universidad Católica Argentina. There you have it. So we go straight online to Mr. Giugale. Mr. Giugale, welcome to the Business Forum. You are live on Power 102 FM, Port of Spain, Trinidad.
Thank you very much, Sandrine. A pleasure being with you and with your people.
Thank you. Mr. Giugale, the statement at the World Bank, we have made the world's challenge to reduce global poverty our challenge. It's quite a powerful one indeed. Could you provide us with a historical perspective or perhaps a background on this concept?
Well, think about it. We are 6 billion people on the planet, and 2.6 billion, almost half of us, live on $2 a day or less. And it's an interesting intellectual exercise to imagine how our personal lives would be living on $2 a day,
yes,
going to sleep every night hungry, without services, certainly not electricity or running water, very poor, if at all, schooling for our children,
yes,
no comforts whatsoever. So, as a mission for an institution like the World Bank, getting rid of that level of poverty has not just an institutional purpose, but I would say almost a personal passion.
yes.
So that's what we've been doing now almost for 60 years. And I have to say with some successes and with a lot of lessons.
And I'm sure you have a lot more work in the pipeline, as we would discover as the interview proceeds further.
Well, we do have quite a lot of work going forward. Let me tell you, much as we were encouraged by the results worldwide of the last 6 years in terms of growth and poverty reduction, poverty finally was beginning to fall, very slowly, but still very significantly. Much as we were happy with all that, all of a sudden the crisis hits us This time the crisis comes from the rich world, not from the poor world. But it's the poor that pay the price for this, as you can imagine.
Yes.
So we have our job cut out for us as an institution. We now have to redouble our efforts, which we've been doing, by the way.
Yes, yes. The bank's mission is to help developing countries and their people reach their goals by working with its partners to alleviate poverty. But what are the specific methods of approach used to initiate this particular activity?
Well, Sandrine, let me clarify that what we normally call the World Bank is actually the World Bank Group, meaning it's not one institution, but 5.
Okay.
On the one hand, there is what we call the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development,
Yes.
which is what most people associate with the World Bank name.
Yes.
We also that institution, the IBRD, lends to governments or mostly middle-income countries that are not extremely poor, measuring this by per capita income, but are not rich either. The Mexicos, the South Africa, the Russias.
Yes.
Then we have another institution within the bank group, which is IDA, International Development Association.
Yes.
This is also a lender to governments, but it's mostly for low-income countries and fragile states.
Okay.
So we lend a lot cheaper and for longer term because their needs are a lot more special than the middle-income countries.
Okay.
We have a third institution called the International Finance Corporation, which what it does is it helps the private sector in the developing world. Look how interesting, no? This one doesn't lend to governments, but rather helps the private sector, because we believe that's where the jobs are created.
Yes.
So they lend to the private sector. Sometimes they take equity position in the private sector, meaning they become partners with the private sector. We also have an institution called MIGA, Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, which what it does is gives comfort to potential investors trying to go into poor countries by giving them guarantees.
Yes.
Guarantees that the regulatory system, for example, will not change on them, that their investment will be protected. And finally, we have another institution which is also very useful to investors thinking about opening factories and opening businesses in poor countries. This sixth institution is the International Center for the Resolution of Investment Disputes, a cumbersome name to say it's a place where we try to mediate disputes between investors, foreign investors, and governments of the developing world. So that gives everybody comfort to walk in and open factories, as I say, open new business, create jobs.
Okay.
So what you have here is a little universe of the so-called World Bank Group. As a matter of tools, what we use is finance. We do investment projects. We lend money to build the schools and hospitals and roads. As I mentioned to you, we also use guarantees. We guarantee certain comfort to investors. We take equity position. As I mentioned to you, the International Finance Corporation can buy pieces of private companies in the developing world.
Yes.
So we have the finance toolkit. But perhaps more importantly than the finance toolkit is the analytical toolkit.
Yes.
After so many years in this business, the bank has, for better or for worse, accumulated a lot of experience.
Yes.
And this is important because it's not just knowledge, it's not theoretical,
Okay.
it's just experience.
Yes.
So the bank has become, in a way, a clearinghouse, a place of exchange of experiences, what works and what doesn't work, for example, in education.
Okay.
How do you make sure that kindergarten children can start reading early on? What have other countries done for that? Or how do you maintain rural roads? Can you build local companies headed by women, local women, to maintain the rural roads? So you will create both better infrastructure and more employment.
Yes.
Or while you will have experiences of many countries that have tried that, and that experience has been documented by the bank. So the bank makes it available to its clients or its members, as we call them.
Okay.
So you can see it's a toolkit of finance mixed with knowledge for 5 different institutions, all of which makes up the World Bank Group.
Okay. Okay. My understanding, Mr. Giugale, is that the bank's efforts are driven by 6 themes. And by focusing on these themes, the bank delivers technical, financial, and other assistance to those most in need, as well as where this assistance will create the greatest impact and promote growth. Could you explain the criteria used in selecting countries?
Indeed, we don't select countries.
Okay.
Countries select us.
Okay.
All countries in the world are welcome to the World Bank. All but 2 are actual members of the World Bank. 186 countries in the world are members of the World Bank. They are all welcome. They can use the bank both for finance or for analytical purposes as they please, because this is their bank.
Yes.
The World Bank is owned by the 186 countries.
Yes.
That's what we call a cooperative. We are a cooperative.
Yes.
And every country in the world has a little share of their capital, of their ownership of the World Bank. And they are all represented in a board of directors where they all sit in 22 chairs. They share the chairs and they take decisions and they say where the bank should go or not go.
Yeah.
And then we, the technical staffers of the bank, trying to implement those decisions.
Yes.
Now, some countries will be more inclined to use us for pure finance.
Yes.
Others, particularly the more advanced countries, call us when they have a problem. If they have to build a school that they know how to do it, they don't call the World Bank because they have their own resources and they know how to do it. But sometimes the issue is more than building a school. Sometimes the issue is how to make sure that teachers show up to teach. And when they show up, they teach the right stuff.
Okay.
And that the results at the end are the ones that will make those children citizens of the world,
Yes.
more competitive in the globalized economy.
Yes.
So, as you can see, there is an issue not just of hardware, building the school, but of software,
Yes.
of what exactly do you do once you have the school. So sometimes the bank is called to do this kind of software work. This is an example, of course, in education. I could also take it completely to the other end of the spectrum and speak about infrastructure. It's not just a question of building a port, but sometimes the question is, how do we get a private operator to run this port and charge reasonable prices?
Yes.
What have other countries done to achieve that? And the bank helps with it.
Yes.
So, as I mentioned to you, we are not just a provider of money. Most of the time, we are a provider of development solutions.
Excellent. Excellent. Mr. Giugale, please stay on the line while we take a short commercial break. When we return, we'll be discussing some of the major projects being undertaken by the bank. Please hold on the line.
I will be happy to. Thank you.
You're listening to the Business Forum here on Power 102.1 FM. It's a very special Business Forum that we bring it to you today. And of course, coming to you courtesy of the Unit Trust Corporation of Trinidad and Tobago. Sandrine, it's back to you.
Welcome back to the Business Forum. If you have just tuned in, my guest is Mr. Marcelo Giugale, who is the Sector Director responsible for poverty reduction and economic management at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. Mr. Giugale, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sandrine.
Yes. At present, the bank is involved in more than 1,800 projects in virtually every sector and the developing countries throughout the world. And to my mind, this is commendable, Mr. Giugale. Could you share with us some information on these projects?
Well, very much as you said it, they span the whole development spectrum. They go all the way from supporting the so-called macroeconomic framework of the country, making sure that there are fiscal accounts that are sound, that there are jobs, that the economy grows, that there is no inflation, everything that has to do with the macro, all the way down to issues like making infrastructure investments sustainable from an environmental point of view. Across that spectrum, you will find major investments and projects in education.
Yes.
And for us, this is perhaps the ABC of development, particularly when that education is directed to women, and more especially young women.
Yes.
And the more we learn in this business of development, the more we realize the younger the better. we are now big in what we call early childhood development, which takes us to think that the best social investment on the individual is perhaps from the very moment of conception, this is before birth, to perhaps 2 or 3 years old. At that age, you can correct many deviations that would otherwise cost you a lot of money to fix later in life.
Yes.
So education is one area where we put major effort. The same thing with health. In many countries now, we call the second generation of health efforts. We are past the need for vaccinations because many of our clients have achieved 100% coverage of vaccinations, for example. And we realize that the best dollar is invested in basic and preventive health care. So we are very local here. We try to help the local clinics to make sure that the monitoring of the citizens happens very regularly. So that saves a lot of money for society and can invest it later in more complex illnesses.
Yes.
We carry on through the spectrum, as I mentioned to you. We do institutions, for example. We try to make sure that we help countries have the best, most responsive, most efficient, most transparent public institutions. And when you face up to a customs officer, behind that person there is an institution. There has to be information from you to him and backwards. There have to be decisions made, and you want all that to be in the favor of society, not in the favor of an individual. Corruption being a big issue for us.
Yes.
The same can be for other institutions. You think about the poor; they don't have many assets,
Yes.
but what they have, they don't have title to. So it's not having twice. You don't have much, and what you have, you don't really own.
Yes.
So we are building tightly in making sure that the poor, particularly in what otherwise would be called shanty towns, we prefer to call them young towns, they have a title to that property. We learned, for example, that the family that owns the property by having a title can in a way allow the mother to go out and work, which doubles almost on impact the income of the household. Imagine what a secondary impact with wonderful consequences both for women but more generally for her children. So as you can see, the spectrum is very ample. As you said, there are more than 1,800 projects in the portfolio.
Yes.
A project normally takes about 5 years to implement.
Yes.
And about a year to articulate. That's important. The design of a project tends to be slower than one would like, and the reason is that we try to listen to the beneficiaries.
Okay.
The idea of going to a place and building something and then expecting people to clap at you for building it is an old idea. Now you need to really listen carefully to the beneficiary, understand the reality, see what they really need, and then make them the leaders of the design and implementation of the project.
Yes.
That seems to be more the key of success for us.
Okay, excellent. I'd like us to shift our attention a bit now to Latin America and the Caribbean, which I'm aware that the World Bank has made some significant inroads. And according to the bank's predictions, there was an expected growth of 5.1% for both the Latin American and the Caribbean economies in 2008. But given the current economic slowdown, what was the actual growth rate in 2008? And perhaps you can also share with us the bank's expectations for 2009 for these economies.
Well, let me start by saying we are very lucky, we Latin Americans and Caribbean,
Yes.
because we have a region of enormous potential, with a lot of frustrated starts in the past, but always with enormous potential. That potential was coming alive during the last 6 years. We were growing very fast.
Yes.
We began to feel a bonanza. The world was in a way smiling to us, willing to buy what we had to sell. And it was going beyond our so-called commodities, meaning raw materials like minerals or energy. And it was past that, and the world was willing to buy our manufacturing. We began to create brands. We began to be known for having good wines, for example, or great fruits.
Yes.
And we were exporting them by flying them overnight to Europe and charging in supermarkets in Germany.
Okay.
So we were doing very well, and this crisis hits us hard. It's a very different type of crisis. It's not the crisis that we know from the past in Latin America that was normally associated with banks going bankrupt and people rushing for their deposits, or with big devaluations of the currencies, or big inflationary spikes, or capital flights, and finally migrants leaving our countries. It's none of that. This crisis comes from abroad, and it comes to us through four contractions, if I may call it like this. The first one clearly is there is less finance for us, less investment, less lending towards Latin America.
Yes.
There is also less demand for what we export. And imagine we were all happy selling our new manufacturers, our new brands, and all of a sudden that demand contracts. Yes. There was also a contraction of the prices of these raw materials, so-called commodities that we sell. Only in the last few weeks this is beginning to reverse, but there was a big contraction at the end of 2008.
Yes.
And then finally the fourth contraction is that the remittances, those flows of money that our migrants were sending us back to home, which was a big amount. It was $60 billion per year. Can you imagine? A third of that was going to Mexico. Those remittances also contracted to a tune of about 10%. That's a lot of contraction.
Yes.
So anyway, this crisis hits us hard towards the end of 2008. I would say the last quarter. So the growth that was coming fast, 5.5, slows down for the whole of 2008 to about 4%. Still decent, but not stellar. Yes. And then hit us even harder in 2009, where the region as a whole, will contract. The economy of the region will contract by about 2%. It's a big contraction, particularly if you take into account that we were growing very fast before. It's like running on a motorbike very fast and all of a sudden going in reverse. Yes. So it doesn't feel very comfortable for riding the bike. Yes. So what we expect for 2009, as I mentioned, is a contraction of about 2 percentage points. We also expect that this will turn around, and here's my opinion. I think that if we manage the crisis well, we may come out of this faster than anybody else. That Latin America could actually be stronger in 2010 than it was in 2009. Yes. I would even argue that this could be a good crisis for us if we manage it well, if we do the things that we had to do even before the crisis and we were not doing.
Yes. Mr. Giugale, as we approach the end of our discussions, what would be some of your closing comments briefly?
Well, I would go back to this idea of the crisis being an opportunity for us. I would say there is a possibility of building a new region. And I will try to give you three angles of this new region, but I'm sure there are many. The first is that maybe this is a time when we can finally come to agreement on equity.
Okay.
Remember, we fight a lot over the inequality that we see in Latin America. Yes. There are some very rich people and a lot of very poor people. And we express that dissatisfaction with inequality by the way we vote. Our elections all finished basically very tight ends, with the right asking for some certain model and the left asking for a completely different model.
Okay.
Behind that there is a fight for redistribution of our wealth. I think the crisis could move us forward because it made us all understand that we can have it both ways. We can have economic discipline and social solidarity. Okay. We can have efficiency and equity. We can have both markets and people.
Excellent.
That's one novelty for us. And the second is we might be able to come out of the crisis with a new social contract between the state and our people. As you know, Latin Americans don't trust the state. Yes. Because they don't trust the state and not to pay taxes. And that traps everybody in a low-level equilibrium, as we call it, meaning that we pretend to pay taxes and the state pretends to give us services. Of course, this is not true for every country, but on average, you can think of Latin America as such. Well, the crisis could be a way to come out of that. Now that we have much more demands on the state, any more demands on the state, we can also say, we would like to see you give us actual results. We can say, now you have more demands and less resources. Let's make sure that for every dollar that you spend, you achieve something. Excellent. This management by result will imply a new social contract where we pay taxes and the state tells us exactly where those taxes go. And finally, I would argue that with this crisis, we now come to a point where we, in a way, look at the role of growth in a very different way. Growth was just extracting more commodities, getting more income. The concept is beginning to be broader. There is a desire for stability, not just growing like mad for 5 years and then contracting for another 2. We used to have a party and then a funeral, and a party and then a funeral. The value of stability has now come forward, and our societies are demanding a smoother development path. So I think that's going to make it also the political arena in the next year or year and a half. And it's going to imply a lot of decisions in the way our economies are managed. I know that it might be very positive for Latin America. I have known for so many years.
Mr. Giugale, it was a pleasure having you on the Business Forum here in Port of Spain, Trinidad, and Power 12 FM.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being in your program. Good luck to you.
We keep in touch. There you have it, Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Marcelo Giugale, the Sector Director responsible for poverty reduction and economic management at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., sharing with us the work that is being facilitated at present by the bank. Thank you for listening. Until next time.